All right, so welcome back, my friend. So in this video, we're going to continue to talk about object methods. So we're going to now learn this keyword. Which keyword? Yeah, this keyword. All right. It's very important for object methods. So where does this variable or this keyword point? Well, in a regular function call, the this keyword simply points at the global object, which, let's just use the case of a browser, it's the window object. So this is actually the default, simple as that. So in a method call, which as you remember is a function that is attached to an object, the this variable points to the object that is calling the method. And something that's really important about variables is that the this keyword is not assigned a value until the function where it is defined is actually called. So again, even though it appears that the this variable refers to the object where it is defined, the this variable is technically only assigned a value as soon as an object calls a method. You got that? Cool. Okay, so now let's go back to the code editor and we'll do up a few examples so that we can get into it a little deeper. So we'll start and we'll just simply log the this keyword. Now all we have to do is console log this, but what can we expect here? Well, let me save this and we'll go to the console. So I'll refresh the page. And in the console, we see window. All right, so this means that this keyword is very simply the window object. And it does make sense, right? Because the window object is the default object. So what I mean is that all functions and variables that we define outside of an object is defined under the default window object. So if I say function, add number here, well, now at this particular moment, this function is defined under the window object. Or if I say var John equal to John, then this variable is also defined in the window object. So now go back to our code. And here at this particular moment, I'm just going to write another function in the window object because, like I said earlier, every function and variable that we define outside of an object is defined under the window object. So just write a simple function. So I'll say function add numbers, and this function is going to take two arguments, x and y. And inside this function, I'll say console.log x plus y. Then let's call this add numbers and give it two arguments. So I'll say 10 and 20. So let me just save this and go to the console. So when I refresh the page, we see 30 in the console. All right, so let's return to our code again. And this time, what we also want here is to console log the this keyword once again. So here inside this function, I'll say console.log this. Now, let me just point out right now that we are not here, we're not in this function, right? So actually, I'm going to comment out this line. All right, so when we call this function, what can we expect this time? Well, we call this function here, so I'll save it and go to the console. And we'll refresh this. Now, try to guess what we're going to see here. You ready? So first, we have the result of 30, which comes from this log here. And this variable is once again the window object. So does it make any sense to you? I hope so, because this is the regular function code, and it's not a method like we learned in the slide. In a regular function code, this keyword always points to the window object. And it actually makes sense because the object that this function is attached to is the global object. And that's where your sense is. So that makes sense because the object that this function is attached to is indeed the global object. Okay, so back to the code. Now, as you can see, the most important point here is whether or not a function is a method. So what is a method? A method is a function that is attached to an object. So this function is not a method. This is just a regular function. So in this function, this points to the global object, which is still window. All right, so now why don't we make an object here? So I'll say var raj equal to an object. And inside of it, I'll say name is Raj, and then I'll say year, which is birth year 1989. So now let's define a function inside this object called say hi again. So I'll write say hi and function and curly braces. And inside that, all I'm going to do is console log this. And this is a method now, right? Because it's in an object. It is an object property, and we call that as a method. I know you got it down now. So why don't we just call this method down here? So I'll say raj.sayHi. Now I save this and go to the console. And here, I'll refresh the page. And yeah, this variable now is the Raj object, and it makes absolute sense, right? All right, so let's go back to the code. We got this object with the this variable because, as we know, the this keyword refers to the object that called the method. So in this case, it was the Raj object. So of course, it has to be the this variable. And in the slide here, we say that, right? Okay, so now let's go back to the code again. Now here, I'm going to make something a little different. This time, I want to use the properties of this object inside this method, reaching them by using this keyword. And we can do that because in this method, the this keyword refers to this object. So here I'll say console.log, say hi plus this.name. Again, at the moment, this keyword refers to the Raj object, and we can reach object properties with dot notation. So down here, we'll call that method. Okay, so now let's save this and go to the console. Here, I refresh the page. And in the console, we see, say hi, Raj. Okay, so let's go back to the code. So that Raj comes from here, from this.name, because this keyword is being called inside the method. So it refers to this object, and I can reach any property of this object inside this method by saying this.name or this.year. So now let's take this even a bit further. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a function inside of the sayHi method. So I'm simply going to call it inner function, and I'll say function some func, and inside of it, all it's going to do is console log this. So I'll say here console.log this. Now, you know something, I want to point out to you that this function, this SumFunc function, it's not a method. Say hi is a method because it is an object property. But SumFunc, it's a function, not a method. It's just a function which is defined inside a function or method. And because this function is not a method, I expect this keyword refers to the global object window. Okay? So to see the result here, I'll call some func. So I'll say some func and parenthesis here. And right now, when we call the say hi function, it's going to call some func here, okay? So I'll save this, go to the console. Here, when I refresh the page, we see the window in the console here, okay? So now go back to the code again. And in fact, some people in the JavaScript community agree with this and others might not agree. It's not necessarily controversial, but some people think that this keyword in here should still be the object, right? The Raj object. You see that? But to me, actually, it makes sense that it's not because, well, it's simply the rule. And the rule is that when a regular function code happens, then the default object is the window object. At least that's how it works in the browser. And that's what we're talking about. So once again, this is not a method because the method is called say hi. So it's a method of the Raj object. But this function here, although it's written inside of a method, it's still a regular function. So when we call it this keyword, it's no longer going to point to the Raj object, but instead point to the window object. Okay, thanks for playing along. It's something that's very important to keep in mind for the future, and also for all your projects that you're going to be working on and developing. And now I'm sure that it's absolutely crystal clear. All right, so why don't you pause right here, review something if you need to, and we're going to continue in the next section.